वाहेगुरु जी का खालसा वाहेगुरु जी की फतेह. Thank you all for logging into this Sikh Research Institute webinar today. My name is Jagdeep Singh and I'll be the host for today's session, and Harpreet Singh will be the moderator. Rinder Singh will be beginning the presentation shortly, but before he starts I'll take a few moments to run through some information to help ensure this session runs smoothly for all of us. Harpreet Singh will then introduce the session and provide some information about the Sikh Research Institute before handing over to Rinder Singh. So to provide some orientation of the main screen you're looking at now, Rinder Singh's presentation will be displayed on the left-hand side of the screen, and you'll be able to see each slide as you scroll through, although you won't be able to navigate through the slides independently. On the right-hand side of the screen, you should see a number of smaller panes. If you can't see any right now, then please click on the Panels drop-down menu, which is toward the top right-hand of the screen, and select the Reset to Default option. You should now be able to see a participant panel and a chat panel. In the participant panel, you'll see all other participants in the session, and towards the top you'll see Rinder Singh, Harpreet Singh, and Sikh Research Institute. During this session, if you wish to ask Rinder Singh questions at any time, you can do so by entering your question in the chat panel, which should appear beneath the participants pane, and sending it to Harpreet Singh. Alongside your question, please include your full name and your city, and an indication of whether or not you have a microphone attached to your computer. Harpreet Singh will moderate the questions as applicable and forward them to Rinder Singh. If you have a microphone, Rinder Singh will invite you to come and ask your question on the mic. But if you do not, then Rinder Singh will read out your question to all participants. In order to keep the session interactive, we do recommend you have a microphone installed. At the end of the main presentation, there will be a general QA session. And if you'd like to ask questions during this time, then again, please forward the questions to Harpreet Singh using the chat panel, and you'll be invited by Rinder Singh to ask your question. Again, please provide your name, city, and an indication of mic and your message. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please don't hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection, or if you have to restart your computer during the session, then you can easily rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that's included in your original registration confirmation email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, Rinder Singh will launch a testimonial and feedback window, and we'd appreciate if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how the session went. I'll now hand you over to Harpreet Singh, who will provide an introduction to this webinar, to Rinder Singh and to the Institute. Vaiguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji ki Fateh.
Vaiguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji ki Fateh. Thank you, Jagdeep, for the introduction. My name is Harpreet Singh, and as you've heard, my role is to be the moderator and to field your questions and pass them along to Rinder Singh. Obviously, Rinder will be busy delivering the session, so it's my pleasure to continue to field these questions for him. As we've done in the past, just send me your name, your location, and your mic status, and I will take that question. So far in these sessions, we've had wonderful questions, and I expect nothing less this session as well. The last point I'll make is that if for some reason your question doesn't get answered during the session today, you can always email info@sikhre.org to further pursue that question. Without further ado, I will pass it along to Rinder Singh. Vaiguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji ki Fateh.
Vaiguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji ki Fateh. I guess good morning to good evening throughout the globe, wherever you are. This is our last session on the Sidh Gosti course, and what we're going to try to do today is cover the rest of the bodies which have been pending from 60s onwards. And then what essentially we're going to do end up after that is talk about what were the major principles throughout the Bani, what were our major learnings for this session, and then we'll do a comparison between Yogmat and Gurmat, and we'll conclude with how Guru Nanak Sahib concludes the Bani and cover some of those areas. So what I would like to really do today is cover the bodies more rapidly and get into more Bani related ideas and questions you might have in terms of its contemporary relevance. So we have shortened the bodies part for this session. With that, let's get into the bodies we're going to get into. So it's body number 61, and we did not list a lot of the Gurbani ones. In a couple of cases we were going to talk explicitly from a Gurbani angle, but we're going to talk more ideas as I mentioned earlier. So in Padi 61, what is happening is it's a continuation from a yogi's angle about very specific technical questions. Kind of questions we might deal in today's ideas on, science is trying to define how did this world come into existence, what happens at the period between when somebody is alive versus when somebody is dead, what is filling up those spaces and stuff like that, and this is where yogis are coming from. They're still after finding out the technical answers. So a major point in Padi number 61, I picked out two major ideas, and you can read the translation there, and I hope all of you have been studying some of this because we're going to cover some of the vocabulary and ideas at the end as well. What he's essentially saying is, Guru Nanak Sahib, what he's sharing with yogis is that, what you guys are trying to do is you're trying to kill the thirst. So this thirst of, like what he's asking here, where does this air go? What do you taste between when the different air circulation is going on between inhalation and exhalation? And essentially the major point is that Guru Nanak Sahib is saying, you are working on trying to kill this thirst of things, or what we call indulgences today, whereas Guru Nanak's response is, I am not working to kill it, my thirst. I'm actually trying to satisfy it, and I'm satisfying it by not indulging in its taste, but rather with divine love. So this idea which comes in this body is, you really, well, we relate to our things today, that what are we really after? You might have heard in contemporary parlance among in gurdwaras or other places that it's about killing the ego. Well, he's sort of, Guru Nanak Sahib is saying, not really. It isn't really about killing. No, it's more about maybe moving it beyond the worldly phenomena. It's filling it with love. We're going to all be filled with some ideas, and you have heard this, that before you can do good learning, you got to unlearn what you have already learned. And this is sort of what Guru Nanak Sahib is doing with the yogis in this body. The other part which is going on is, how do you become immortal? This idea of Amrit is introduced. The Amrit word is very, very common word throughout Gurbani, and I think in Sidh Gosti it's going to be covered in next 3-4 parties as well. So the literal meaning of Amrit, makes it opposite, and Mrit is death. Amrit is something which is beyond death, which is immortal. So immortality, whatever your understanding of immortality, whatever your understanding of transcending this classical interpretation of life cycle of birth and death, or whether it is the life cycle of not living and living, like Guru Nanak Sahib has described life cycle as that too, that when I'm in forgetfulness, I'm not alive, I'm dead. When I'm in remembrance, I'm alive. So anyway, the idea of Amrit is immortal, something which goes beyond the phenomena as we understand of death. Okay. So Guru Nanak Sahib says, how does one really become immortal? He says, well, when we clean up our system from whatever is defined or understood as vices or ungodly, this is when we become immortal. So immortality is not something, a physical action. Immortality is not a physical drinking of something. Immortality is not a physical space. Immortality is not something you go after you die to become all these things. Guru Nanak Sahib's idea of immortality is, this is when your identification with divine is occurring. This is when you have become godlike. So, basically whatever Gurbani says, if you follow it properly and the application of that this is how you become immortal. I want to move on to body number 62 and 63. Essentially in 62 and 63, there are not really question and answers, there are more elaborations going on. And the way it seems is that Guru Nanak Sahib by now has looked at how yogis have been behaving. So essentially what yogis are really after is to establish that ascetics are the superior people, or grist people who participate in householder life are not as superior. And we'll see this. In fact, let me pull out one of the lines which you may have not, you've seen the translations of it. For example, a line in point number 62 says, Bind na rakhya, sabad na pakhya. Now, Bind is the potency force. This idea of Bind also is, when gristis get involved in procreation and stuff like that. So essentially what Siddhs are saying, two major points I want to discuss and talk about in these 40 is that gristis, how can you be a grist and be engaging in these spiritual affairs. Well, what Guru Nanak Sahib says is, well, that's exactly what Grist does. Grist is the one who is not only engaged in householder's life, but also is working to develop himself or herself. And then he gives a very stark differentiation in point number 63 between what a Guru-oriented person or a Gurmukh, the Grist who becomes Guru-oriented, and a yogi is. And the differentiation is, he says, that the Gurmukh becomes immortal because Gurmukh is working toward not just personal freedom, but also collective freedom. Now this is really important. Whereas yogis is working towards personal satisfaction of some kind. So it's very individualistic. Whereas the one who is a Gurmukh oriented, a Grist who's following the Guru's way, which is following the idea or the message, that person is not only just trying to satisfy himself or herself, that person is actually working for personal freedom as well as collective freedom. And where am I interpreting that from? Well, there is a line in body number 63 where it says, Sach Aradhya Gurmukh Tartari. This is really interesting because, and he says right next to it, Nanak Bhuja Ko Vichari. So it's saying, there are rare personalities who have this wisdom within them that not only are they working to free themselves, but they are looking at the collective transformation of people. So what Guru Nanak Sahib in elaborations of body number 62 and 63, what he's doing is he's saying, if you really want to compare the two styles or two ways or the two lifestyles, he says the lifestyle which Gurmukh follows is much more principle-centered, and it's not just about his personal satisfaction, but also about collective transformations. Whereas yogi is really about satisfying his own personal needs through their own personal disciplines. So this is what's the idea in body number 62 and 63. Now when we go into next two bodies, what we see is the more questions start, because now Guru Nanak Sahib has elaborated what he is really after. So you'll see the questions change again, because now the questions are more about, well then how do we, you can say that somebody's in a rush, like when we described a debate scene earlier, when a few people are participating, and then some people ask very fundamental questions, some ask very hurried questions, some ask trivial questions. So it seems like as soon as Guru Nanak Sahib finishes with his responses, you have some lot of hurried questions, which basically are short questions. How do you answer these things? For example, in 64 and 65, the questions are, this mind is like an elephant, and what is in this air? How can you have wind in these or air in these things? Where does the Shabad live? How do you get rid of the cycle of life and death? And by now you can pretty much guess what Guru Nanak Sahib does. So he's going to give, answers again in his own way. And the kind of answers he gives is what? He basically starts saying, well, you can look at it, that it's, the mind recognizes the origin. So what is he saying again? He's saying it's the mindfulness. He says, we need to really work towards, he's saying to yogis that you do the abhyas of physical activity, whereas I believe in Nam Abhyas. And I know today in certain Sikh circles, Nam Abhyas also means a physical way of doing it. But when Guru Nanak Sahib is presenting it, he's talking about this connection within you and connection with the things around you. You'll also notice in these two bodies, this idea of sun and moon comes back. Now, we described it in last session, but I want to get into it a little bit again this time, because this is symbolic usage as well as a literal usage. And what is going on? Well, in this, I think the body number, it's in 64, where he gets asked, Guru Nanak Sahib is asked a very explicit question. Kyo mool pachhana atam jane, kyo sas kar sur samave. So sas and sur, the sun and the moon, within the yogic systems, there is an activity which basically, well, I'm sure you've heard of some of the yogas popular these days, from Bikram Yoga to Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga. So this Hatha Yoga is where you combine the sun and the moon. Now, we described in last session there are physical spaces within the body which yogis believe that where you combine them, this is when the Hatha Yoga occurs. But actually the word heart in certain yogic system also means that the Ha stands for sun and the Ta stands for moon. So heart becomes when you're able to combine these two physical spaces in the body and this is when you have made it. So basically, Hatha Yogi is the one who's been able to perfect this technique. That's what the background of it. So Guru Nanak Sahib is being asked, how are you going to perfect this technique? And well, Guru Nanak Sahib's response is, you can guess pretty much that he's going to take it beyond physical step. And he says, Gurmukh homme vichho khove, to sahaj samave, to nanak sahaj samave. He says, you know what? I'm really not after this physical alignment. I'm really after creating this sahaj idea. Now, word sahaj itself, we have all heard it probably 100 times. It has different meanings and different contexts. But a simplistic way for me to look at sahaj is when something is habitual, when something is effortless. So you have made an effort, but it has become part of you. Something which is beyond the measure or the parameters which either the religious systems give. For example, in Indian religious system, they used to say you are caught up, the world is divided into these three entities of Rajo, Tamo, Sato, Rajsik, Tamsik, and Sattvic, which are divisions of how one should live. And Guru Nanak Sahib's response is, well, that's okay if you want to believe in these three different ideas, but I believe in the fourth idea, which is the Sahaj idea, where everything is in balance. And the balance is the way you describe it. Some people call it equipoise, some say harmony, some say union. Whatever word you want to use, Guru Nanak's response to yogis basically is, the way I align sun and the moon is that I am able to live in harmony. So essentially, yogis were still after, well, do you know Hatha Yoga? This is something we might do today. When we are asked fundamental questions of life, we might come up with technical things. Hey, do you really understand what this really word means? Or have you really tried this technique of observation? Or have you tried this yogic technique? Or have you really studied the complete understanding of Japji Sahib? And Guru Nanak Sahib is showing us an approach. He said, none of us can understand everything in completion. The idea is whatever we do understand, have we really applied that understanding to move ourselves to the next levels, and whatever our level of development is. So I interpret this as being, it's not about physically or intellectually or trivially knowing things. It's about whatever you do know, towards what end are you using that. So that's what the focus is in 40, 64, and 65. So next 40s, you're going to have more questions, which are getting into, this whole, today's world also asks about these ideas of heart and body and mind and soul. You hear these kind of words, what is the role of which one, how do you tame what, how do you move in physical spaces is what yogis are again after. And you'll notice, for example, if you look at the second question on the slide right now, when the pillar of lotus in the navel was not, then in which house did the air take support? When nothing existed, where did the Shabad come from? So again, there's still, you'll notice the yogis' responses are coming out of this vacuum idea. We talked about this nothingness idea, that yogis are really after isolation, or kaivalya, if you remember the terminology from the first session. So yogis are still about there is space, or there is lack of space, what fills that space at what point in time. And Guru Nanak Sahib is going to, again, if we look at his responses to these in 40 number 67, he's actually starting to refer to all of them as adhus over and over. And adhu is a word which at that time also means abdut, which means recluse or a yogi. So he's like, so now basically you'll notice that Guru Nanak Sahib is starting to call on yogis and yogis all the time, because the only question Siddhs keep asking to him are the ones which have to do with their techniques. And they are not looking at, what affects the lifestyle of people. What is this life about? What is my relationship with my surroundings? So Guru Nanak Sahib essentially is saying, and we can look at it today too. We keep asking one or two technical questions rather than looking at how to relate to the bigger issues of life. So that's why when he answers, he says, recluse, adhu. When there was nothing, that's when you were in nothingness. So when there was no heart or there was no body, then the mind was still. It was unattached. It was still. Yogi believes stillness is their state, but Guru Nanak Sahib uses stillness of the Vahaguru, the Sun idea, that we were all part of Vahaguru. So there never was not Vahaguru. Because yogis are in the denial of the existence of creator. In Guru Nanak Sahib keeps informing that there is something, a higher divine force. So what essentially is going on these next two bodies is more of these physical, technical questions. And Guru Nanak Sahib is asserting, well, the spaces are filled by Vahaguru. Spaces are filled by this integrative force. These spaces, there is somebody, some entity which fills everything. There is no such thing as vacuum or nothingness. And that's what he is pushing the yogis to think about. So I think this is a good point where I want all of us to maybe take 30 seconds and think about what kind of questions do we ask? Are they always trivial? Are they always technical? And there's nothing wrong with asking that. If you notice, Guru Nanak Sahib was being asked this for more than half the Bani, and at some point now in these bodies, he's starting to change the focus of questions. He's like, enough of these technical questions. It's sort of like what Bhai Gurdas says in one of his words, that you keep asking the questions, but you're not walking on the path of love. So I think this is a question to all of us as students of Sikhi, or in a larger sense as a traveler in this life, that, you know, what kind of questions are we asking? Are the questions about only destination? Are the questions are only about physical spaces? Are the questions only about the guarantees of what happened after this life? Or are we going to ask questions about here and now, about how do I live beautifully? How do I celebrate my life? So basically, how many of our questions start with how versus why versus what? Think about it and see if you can come up with where am I, and do some evaluation from a yogi's angle. Am I a contemporary yogi? Or am I a contemporary recluse? Am I insular to what is happening in the world around me and asking only those questions in my own ghettoization of the mind? Am I looking at the questions which are affecting the world? What were the events of last week? What should my response be? What was my relationship at home last week? Am I thinking about those questions? Or am I only still thinking about, I really want to understand that one word's meaning, or I only want to know how do I get guaranteed spot in heaven? Think about the questions we are having, or you are having. Well, in body number 68, we're going to see a few more questions regarding the creation of this world. How did this world come into existence? Again, these are curiosities we have, and we all have it from various angles. And Guru Nanak Sahib's response is that the world, comes into the existence with some sort of a home. He uses that word home. Home which jag upajay, purkha naam visarya dukh pai. He said everything which is happening in this world is in some sort of I-centeredness. And because we become I-centered, that gives us lots of pain. So question is, as you can see, there is one very fundamental question here, and then Guru Nanak Sahib gets into the response of it, that he brings in the idea of Naam again, he brings in the idea of ego, and he basically says, you cannot have yoga without Naam. So now, Guru Nanak Sahib is completely challenging the basis or the foundations of existence of yoga. Because to yogis or the Siddhs, yoga is the lifestyle, yoga is the way. And he says, well, Naam is the way. Without Naam, there is no union, because they believe it's the union with whatever force they are working with. So now imagine this, that you're having dialogue with somebody, and you are now, after discussing for 70 paragraphs roughly, you're basically heading towards a conclusion. We gotta end this debate at some point. And Guru Nanak Sahib is now saying, you know what, at the end of the day, it comes down to what are your assumptions? What are your parameters on how you look at life? And now Guru Nanak Sahib is going after the very parameters of the Sidh system. And he says, without Naam, without this culture of identification, everything else is forgetfulness, and this is the cause This is the pain. This is why there is suffering. This is why there is a mental, physical sufferings we all witness, whether they are in relationship or with nation states or with people. And he says the actual yoga, the real yoga is when we are operating in Naam. Otherwise, it's all just, well, according to Guru Nanak Sahib, we are just wasting our time in one sense. So what happens in the next three bodies is he's elaborating on these ideas. This idea of Gurmukh again, the idea of Naam. He's basically saying in the first body, how do you connect to this idea of Gurmukh or Guru-orientedness? Or as Parivir Singh said that in these three bodies, to actually paraphrase him, he says in these next three bodies, Guru Nanak Sahib is describing three things for us. What is Naam and what are the fruits of Naam? Who is the giver of Naam? And the one who receives this gift, who is this Gurmukh? So this idea that Guru Nanak Sahib, after challenging the fundamental existence of the parameters of the yoga system, he is describing to him, establishing that Naam is everything. People who take wisdom from the Guru, they understand this Naam, and what is the lifestyle of the ones who take this wisdom. And I know I'm rushing through these because I really want to get after the ideas of the Barnis and the learnings. So, to reiterate or to summarize what Guru Nanak Sahib is covering in these three Barnis, three bodies, is that there are rare individuals who actually identify with Vahaguru, and that's what Naam is. The giver of the Naam is the Guru. That if you really want to understand who gives Naam, because we are confused about this too. There are organizations and Sant Babas and shops, we'll call them, in the marketplace of ideas where people are giving Naam. What Guru Nanak Sahib establishes, bin Satgur seva jog na hoy, bin Satgur peta mukat na hoy. So the one who is the truthful being, which in Sikh parlance refers to the Guru, that Guru is the one who gives Naam. Guru shows us how to identify with everything in life. And those who identify with it, they become Guru-oriented, and Guru-oriented are the ones who know how to be principled in their lives. Few of you are sending me questions. Please send them to Harpreet, and I won't be able to entertain them because I'm trying to do presentations, and he has to look at the questions and then route them to me. So if you have questions, which I know you do because you're sending them to me, you got to send them to Harpreet Singh, who's the moderator. This is the body I'm going to focus on. Body number 72, the second last body. Now let's look at it. I want to read it loud. It said, this is what, according to Guru Nanak Sahib, his conclusion is. He says, Sabde ka nibeda sun tu odhu, bin naame jog na hoi. Nibeda is, I don't want to say it's conclusion only or it's the final answer, but you can think of it being in the South Asian or Punjabi parlance that, you know what, okay, what's the bottom line type idea? So the bottom line is what? And this is what Guru Nanak Sahib is saying. Sabde ka nibeda sun tu odhu. Again, he uses the word odhu. So remember, he's keep referring to them as yogis and siddhs now, instead of just, generically referring to them. Bin naam jog na hoy. He's like, this is the bottom line. Without naam, there is no yoga. There is no union. There is no final answers to what you guys are looking for. Namme rate andin mate namme te sukh hoy. Naam is everything. Naam is where you discover the celebration of life. Naam is where you figure out how to deal with sorrows of life. Namme hi te sab pargat hoga, namme sochi pari. If we are trying to gain insights of life, it happens when you have Naam in your life. Bin naam pe ek kare bahut tera sachai aap khwai. Now this statement, he's obviously saying to yogi, but I feel like he's saying it to me. And those of us who claim to be understanding the religion completely. It says, bin naam pe ek kare bahut tera. That without Naam, a lot of us are deceiving people and saying we know what Naam is, or we know what religiousness is, we know what religiosity is, we know how to connect with God. He says, bin naam pe ek kare bahut tere. Several of us claim to know what exactly is happening in the garbs of deception. Sachai aap khwai, but this is not really, they're away from the truth. They are not the ones who are operating in truth because they don't have Naam in their life. Sadgur te naam paiye odhu jog jugat ta hoi. Now this is really, really critical here, this line, the second last line. He says, when you have this learning, this identification of naam through the Guru, this is when, O Sidh, you figure out what the jog and the jugat is. You figure out the methodology at that time. So he's saying all the methods we have of different yogic systems, different techniques, different postures, what we'll call physical and intellectual capacities of having harmony with God, they're worth nothing unless there is identification, unless there is this understanding of Naam. And kar bichar man dekho nanak bin naam mukt na hoi. The way to become free is the liberation, the moksha, the mukti, the nirvana, whatever word you want to use, and there are various words people use to describe this idea of the classical idea of moksha or mukti in Indian systems. Guru Nanak Sahib says, you know what, freedom is with reflection, freedom is in the mind. And you know, I generally refer to this from a political angle, that when there are genocides going on and there are case studies available, not just among Sikhs in the last 20 years, but in the last 500 years, but also in Nazi Germany, that there are people who were imprisoned in the gas chambers. And one of the testimony I remember explicitly is, you know, that the Nazis or Hitler thinks that he has killed our freedom, but he still does not control what is in my mind. I'm free in my mind. I love that because it completely correlates what Guru Nanak Sahib is saying. Freedom is firstly in the mind, then it has manifestations in outer forms, which are physical freedoms. Let me just cover the ideas. So the ideas in this body, which is the crux of it, or the bottom line as Guru Nanak Sahib presents, is the Naam is the answer to everything. So I'll take a question now. There's a question from Gulberg Singh from Atlanta. How does Guru Nanak define Naam? How do we practice Naam for Guru Nanak? Excellent. And this is one of the, thank you for asking this. And this is one of the questions which we talk about quite a bit. And I'm going to get into it. If you give me 2 more minutes, we have a whole slide on talking about the various methodologies that Guru Nanak Sahib talks about and what's his method. So give me a couple of more minutes and I'll cover this. So the last body is, well, it's on the screen. You can read what is written by Guru Nanak Sahib there, or the rough translation of it. But I want to present the context of it. The context is, it's a very common South Asian genre that the first and the last bodies are always about Vahaguru. For example, if you even, or God, or Allah, or whatever your understanding of godliness is, and even if you look at contemporary songs which are more of development nature or spiritual or relationship nature, or established Punjabi poetry like Heer, they start out like this as well. So what Guru Nanak Sahib is doing is, he started with the idea of oneness and God, when he said, I salute not the yogis, but I salute the one who can, who is the master of this universe. Now Guru Nanak Sahib, after giving the bottom line, comes back to talking about Vahaguru, the universal force. And he says, the force which we are trying to connect with, which is Naam, is limitless. It's unknowable fully. It is everywhere. It fills every space. This is the force which created this. This is the force which we need to realize. We need to not fight this force, but rather become part of it. We need to be in sync with this force. And this is what Guru Nanak Sahib is again saying, that Abhinasi Prem Prab Khel Rachaya Gurmukh Soji Hoi. He uses the word Khel, that imperishable Vahaguru, Abhinasi, has come up with this Khel. And the word Khel has interesting playfulness to it, because literally it means play. It means maybe even a sport if you were looking from a Western angle of it. But what is this Khel? He says Vahaguru has established this Khel. Who understands this game? And you can use a sports analogy here. If you're watching a game you're not familiar with, you are just wondering what is happening. For example, I remember my grandmother asking me, watching American football, why are they just piling up on each other, or why are they hitting each other? Is this a game, or is this a cruelty? So you can have different ideas on what is happening if you don't understand the game. And this is what the Nanak Sahib is saying, that we are all witnessing a game, something which is occurring in this world, But because we don't understand the game, we are all guessing, and we are shooting in thin air. We are hitting darts in wrong places. And this line, this second last line Guru Nanak Sahib writes in this Bani is, Abhinasi prab khel rachaya, gur mukh soji hoi. By becoming Guru-oriented, you understand the insights of this game. Now, I needless to say, this has been a major theme within the Bani, and we'll get into the learnings part, and then the learnings from this particular, the last 20 so odd bodies are these. Let me just put all three. There's only three of them. First is, Guru Nanak Sahib is establishing Vahaguru is the being. It's not one of the yogis who figured out certain techniques, whether you consider it to be Shiv or Gorakh or anyone else. So how do you really understand this limitless divine? In Guru Nanak's submission is you do it through deep love for creation. This is how you connect with it. This is how you will feel the limitless divine, who we are calling Vahaguru from a Sikh parlance. So it is not just a matter of physical or intellectual capacities. It has to go in the realm of feeling. It has to transcend the faculties of mind and body. Mind and body are part of it. It has to go into this idea of connectedness, this idea of relationships. Second, purity is not a physical thing. It's the lifestyle which makes you pure. So as we become divine-like, as we become Vahaguru-like, whatever your idea of Vahaguru is, if you bring that attribute into your life, this is how you become pure. So don't think you become pure by eating in a particular way or by living in a particular way in terms of physical discipline. You become pure when you become Vahaguru-like, when you become God-like. This is how you become pure. And third major learning is that nothing can happen without Naam. So what is the action? Well, start pursuing Naam. And this brings us to the question which was asked earlier. What is Naam according to Guru Nanak Sahib? Well, as we covered earlier, according to, as I understand Guru Nanak Sahib, Naam is everything. Naam is what we end up calling a culture. In culture, there are several dimensions. In every dimension, when you don't see the other, when you see everything as being Vahaguru, when you operate in the back of your mind from a Vahaguru-like qualities, when you operate in devotion and submission, this is Naam. Naam is the continuity of seeing Vahaguru within you and around you. And the responses which we give, if they're born out of that realization, then we are operating in Naam. Thank you for asking that question earlier. Second question is from Parminder Maan from Surrey in Vancouver area. How do you even begin to learn or know how to celebrate life? Could you please give some examples of how you gain insights? Well, I can do my conjecturing, or a better way to do that will be, let's look at how Guru Nanak Sahib does it. So let me go to the next slide. This is what Sidh Gosti did. And I'm going to actually put all of it and see if this makes sense on how you can gain insights or how can you bring celebration into your life. Sorry, I went too far. Let's go back to the slide. So this is what the whole of Sidh Gosti is covering. These are the words we are looking at and how they connect this whole idea of the highest level of things available to us is Vahaguru, and how to connect with that through our lives. So if we recognize that source of everything in this life is Vahaguru, then the way we look at our existence will be very different. For example, if I feel I am the source of my kids, the way I deal with my kids will be very, very different, because I feel I own them, I am the source. If we feel source is Vahaguru, the way I deal with my kids will be very different. Then we might start saying, I'm just a caretaker. I've been given the responsibility, rather privilege, rather a gift of life was given to me by Vahaguru, who is the source, for an opportunity to see how I can nurture them for a time being. So the way we look at existence changes if we feel the presence of Vahaguru, if we feel the source of everything in this existence is Vahaguru. And if our ideas on creation change, then this idea of the other love does not exist anymore. Right now we are deceiving ourselves. This is the idea of Maya. What is causing the pain? What is this enticement? You know, within Sidh Gosti, the words like serpent or the idea of a snake was used to describe this deception. In fact, in other traditions, snake is used to describe that idea too. Well, we are deceived if we don't believe that this life is real, this existence is real, and the source of this reality is Vahguru itself. If we start feeling that way, then we are not being deceived, whether it's a self-deception or other people or other ideas deceiving us. So this, once we are out of this otherness, our deception dies. So this idea of this is my son, this is my house, I know this is very sort of maybe a very smaller way of looking at it, but this is where I am, this is where most of us are. We have this idea of what I own things, or this is mine. That happens in relationships, this happens with nations, this happens with communities. If Israel and Gaza did not feel that there were two different entities, maybe the relationship will be different. If in Indian realities the Dalits were not thought of as Dalits or untouchables, the way we deal with them will be very different. And this is the deception. The deception is that we operate in the other condition. And because we operate in this other condition, we have this affliction, these pains, which we call home or ego. This is the I-centeredness, which produces the I-centeredness rather. This individuality, we are living in forgetfulness. We are not connected with the divine, so there is a lot of ignorance, and that ignorance produces a paradigm which is individual-centric. And when we become individual-centric, we have lots of pains. We have suffering. And this is the symptom. The suffering is the symptom is basically that because I am I-centered, because I am operating in ego, I am being deceived by the other condition. I feel this existence is not real. You know, the questions like, why does this happen to me? Why is this only happening to me? How come my father doesn't understand what I'm saying? Well, this happens, and this kind of suffering becomes very real. Then we get caught up into this. So how do you alleviate all this? How do you get it out of deception and ego and I-ness? Well, the answer is the Guru. The reason the Guru is the answer is because Guru is perfection and Guru shows us freedom. Freedom from all these things. Guru is the way. Guru is the answer. Guru is the perfection. Guru is the one who makes you liberated. And liberation here is freedom. Freedom from anything and everything which binds you. Things which restrict you, things which constrict you, things which belittle you, things which push you down, things which disempower you. The role of the Guru is to get you out of all those. And who is this for? Well, it's for those who want to become Guru-oriented. That's what the disciple is. In Sikh parlance, that's a Sikh. The enlightened individual is the one who works towards freedom. So if I believe I am a great Sikh, but I feel I'm not free, then there is something wrong with that statement, because somebody who really feels he or she is a Sikh, they are free individuals. They operate as free people. This is where in other parts of Gurbani it's described as those who love Guru Amar Das, for example. He says, who is Guru Amar Das Sahib happy with? He says, I'm happy with those who roam around freely, who operate beyond fear, who bestow gifts but are not looking for gifts. So Guru-orientedness is when we go to the Guru and ask him and learn from the Guru on how to be free. When we become free, in the words of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib, when you are beyond fear, this is when you are free. When you are neither fearful of anyone and nobody fears you, this is the great insight of life, and this is what freedom is. So in other words, the Jnani or the enlightened person or the disciple is the one who is a free individual. So how do you become free? How do you become an enlightened individual? This is where Guru-orientedness comes. And technically you can look at it how the word Gurmukh is written in two different ways. The second last bullet you are looking at, where Khakha has Sayari, these are the instructions for Guru-orientedness. How do you know, how do you become free? And Sidh Gosti, Lord of the Bani outside of Sidh Gosti says, well, you do it by following the instructions of the Guru, which for us are contained in Shabad. So what is Naam? When we follow the instructions to become free, because Guru is already free and Guru knows how to deal with the pains of this world, and Guru is beyond I-ness and has figured out how to live, go beyond ignorance, and does not operate in the other condition, has already realized that this life is great and is connected with the source, that's Naam. When the ideas we have and the practices we have are synchronized, that's Naam. This is the culture. You know, right now when we talk about culture, we might have this ideas of there's a Punjabi culture, there's American culture, but there are other ways to look at it. There is a pop culture, there is a music culture. There are other cultures also which are what we might call them negative, quote-unquote cultures. There is a culture of impunity in this world, where people are committing crimes against humanity, where they are using phosphorus gases in today's age like they did in '84, and Israel is also using it now. There is a culture of impunity from when the Hamas chooses to kill civilians on the other side. So there are different cultures operating. And in these various cultures, various civilizations, there is another way to look at it, that when Guru Nanak Sahib comes on the scene in the South Asia, there is this culture which is represented through Semitic traditions, and there is a culture which is represented through Aryan civilizations of Hinduism. Within the context of this Bani, Guru Nanak Sahib is presenting, there is a culture of Yoga, and there is a culture of Guru. So Naam is a culture. This is the alternative lifestyle available to us, that if you want to make your life celebratory, if you want to have freedom in your life, then as a Sikh or even as a non-Sikh, because this Bani is written for everyone, once we operate in the culture of Naam, where our thoughts, our ideas and our practices are synchronized, this is when the Naam becomes real. Where Naam is not an idea, where Naam is not a technique, where Naam is how you live. It's the reality of everyday life. So this is what Naam is, that I understand it, and this is how you celebrate your life. So specific examples are, I use the idea of kids, I use the idea of political infliction, the pains going on. So apply that. It's a culture. You can apply it to anything and everything which we are engaged in. Thanks for asking that. So let's get into a little bit about what has really happened in this Bani. This is a brief synopsis of two cultures you can look at. The yogic culture and the Guru Nanak's culture of Gurmat. In yoga system, they really are not really after having divinity at all. In fact, they even deny the existence of divinity, whereas Guru Nanak Sahib is saying every space is filled with creator and sustainer. So divinity is very, very real to Guru Nanak, whereas for yogis, at best, it's an isolationist concept, if that. Yogis' purpose is to develop concentration of mind. Guru Nanak's purpose is to develop, the purpose is to have inspired personal and collective living. Two very different things. That's why yogi is after becoming an ascetic, whereas Guru Nanak Sahib is after having a grast who is involved in everything, personal and collective living, inspired living. Yoga is after looking at, yoga looks at life in three different ways. Yogic culture believes there is Prakriti, there is Purusha or Atma, and then there is a liberation when you separate the two things. Essentially, it likes to see things in divisions, whereas Guru Nanak's thought is in unity. He says, when you are able to go beyond dualities, when you are able to go beyond the other conditions, when you start to see the oneness, the Ik Oankar aspect of Guru Nanak's declaration to the world, and not just a declaration but his realization, he says this is where, when you go beyond divisions, is when you have made it. Yogic belief is that everything is suffering. That's why we should live in isolation. Withdrawal is the solution. Whereas Guru Nanak Sahib says, no. Withdrawal is not the solution. Active participation is the solution. This is the chance to realize who we are. Realization doesn't occur after this life, it occurs now. And let's have this realization by having participation in this life, by having prayer in our life, having effort in our life. So it's very anti of yogic system, which believes in withdrawal and isolation. Guru Nanak Sahib believes in mindfulness and participation. Yogis believe in isolation, Guru Nanak Sahib believes in harmony. Guru Nanak Sahib says, I don't want to live an insular life. I don't want to live a compartmentalized life. I don't want to live a life of nothingness. I want to live a life of thoughtfulness, where there's a harmony of, where I'm able to see that I am connected to everything in this life. And by the way, this is one way to look at when we look at accounts in Janam Sakhis, how Guru Nanak Sahib, Janam Sakhis are not to be just looked at as ridiculous stories or narratives. That will be a childish way, I submit humbly, to look at it. That's a very childish attitude. Janam Sakhis, yes, the way they are written, because the earlier literature, in any culture when you go to, early literature is written in a very archaic way. You know, we don't understand the way it's written. But one way to look at those Sakhis will be how Guru Nanak Sahib is connected with not just himself and Wahguru, but how he is also connected with creation in every form. Whether it was the animals, his stories with the serpent, his narratives with how his relationship is the king of the time, the intellectuals of the time, his relationship with his wife, his relationship with his sister, Bibi Nanaki, and his brother-in-law, his relationship is when he is going into fields and how he deals with buffaloes. I think those Sakhis will have a very different meaning to you. This culture of Naam will become maybe a little bit more real if we look at those narratives as Guru Nanak's relationship with himself, with Wahguru and the surroundings which we call creation. For Yoga, the way is through physical activities. You have breath controls, you have concentration techniques, you are moving these nerves or aligning them, aligning the Sukhmana Ida and Pingala and other postures. Whereas Guru Nanak Sahib, it's about love, submission, devotion, activism, a V-centered paradigm as I like to call it. So one is a very technical way to do things, the other one is a celebratory live. And celebration, you have multiple things going on. You know, how can you define love? I mean, people try it, but you really live love. Submission is individual thing, whereas devotion is collective thing. Activism is you take your personal learnings and you apply it to the communities you live in. So the approach is very, very different from a yogic angle to a Gurmat angle. Yoga stresses very much on how what you dress, the symbolisms and the lifestyle of yogis, whereas Guru Nanak Sahib stresses, he doesn't denounce those things, but he says, you know, I want to give emphasis to the learnings and the practices, not necessarily the symbolisms. So this slide is a very, very sort of, to me, it's a very real difference between the two cultures. Gurmat side is a culture of Naam, yogic side is the culture of, well, the physical techniques. So this is another way to look at Naam. By the way, we are almost done, and please feel free to send your questions to Harpreet, and we can get into any or everything which we've been covering so far. So the principles which were on the previous slide, let's look at it again. This is what Sidh Gosti covered. It connects Wahguru and Naam, and at one point Wahguru and Naam, in this slide would have been better if it was a circle, but think of it as being when Wahguru and Naam are connected, this is the culture we are operating in. But the reason we feel disconnection is because we feel our existence is in other condition. We have deception in our life, we have I-centeredness, this is why we suffer. When we invite Guru into our life, as earlier in the Sidh Gosti, Sadgur ke kar janm ke, which there was a line earlier in the Sidh Gosti talked about that we had birth into this world, but when we are ready to have birth in the Guru's house, this is when we discover what life is. This is when we discover what celebration is. And this slide is the two schools of thought, and Guru is giving us a choice. Guru does not say that go follow only this way. Guru Nanak Sahib is saying, here is the way I feel things get done. And this is a comparison of Guru Nanak's house versus the house of yoga. So, this Bani started out with this Rahao line, which was the central idea. Kya paviya sach sucha hoye, saach sabad bin mukat na hoye. The wondering is not the answer. The purification is in the truth, which is contained within the Shabad. And mukat na hoye, freedom. Nobody is free unless they deal with the freedom within the Shabad or the wisdom. And look at how Guru Nanak Sahib, when he gives his bottom line, look at the line. He says, Sabde ka nibeda suntu. So we might be asking, what is the Shabad? Here is Guru Nanak's response again. Sabde ka nibeda surtu adhu bin nama jog na hoy. So if there was a confusion about what Shabad is, which helps us to become free, he says Shabad is a culture of Naam, which gives you harmony. Harmony is in the culture of Naam. And then he says, you can spend all your time thinking about what one should do. Kar bichar man dekho nanak bin naam mukna. He says you can look at and exhaust all the techniques available to you, and he says I invite you to do that. In fact, I like this approach of Guru Nanak Sahib because he never says this is it or I am the way. He says I have considered a lot of different things. This is what I have discovered what works for me, and he says I invite you to go reflect on everything else available to you and see what works for you. He's sharing what worked for him. So the purification is in the truth, Naam is the answer, freedom is contained for 6 within the Shabad. Any questions so far on anything which we have been talking about within Sidh Gosti? Or you feel Sidh Gosti was too technical for you? I don't think it has been technical. I personally like the way how it covers various ideas. You know, this idea on how you debate with people, on how you bring the questions around to more fundamental questions. You answer some technical questions, but you want to bring focus on the bigger issues of life. So here is another question from Gulberg Singh in Atlanta. Is reciting Vahaguru over and over considered Naam Japna in Guru Nanak's message, or is it only recognizing Naam in the surroundings? Well, thank you for asking that. This is a question which is asked several times within 6 settings. I think we covered this in earlier sessions, but a brief answer would be Guru Nanak Sahib says anything and everything is Naam which helps you to identify. So, if physical aspect of reciting Vahaguru, Vahaguru, Vahaguru helps you to connect with Vahaguru and communicate with Vahaguru, it is an answer. If it is reduced to a mere physical technique and it is not helping you communicate with Vahaguru, then it is not working for you. So every individual has to decide whether this works for you or not. Guru Nanak Sahib definitely challenges everyone to not reduce things to their physical phenomena alone. Things can start out from a physical angle, but the purpose is to connect and communicate. If that communication is not occurring and I keep reciting it in a physical manner, then for that individual, for that person, they need to do something else. So Naam is a culture which includes any and everything. You have to make a determination whether you are participating in that culture or whether I am being deceiving people. As Guru Nanak Sahib said earlier in the Shabad, that बहुत लोग बड़े पे कर रहे हैं. Am I using that to deceive people that I'm connecting, or this is really helping me to connect with Vahaguru? That's the way to look at it. So it's to be self-evaluated in Guru Nanak's house is his approach. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions? While you are thinking of other questions to ask, let me go to the last slide. And this is just some more pointers on how to look at Sidh Gosti. So Sidh Gosti should not be looked at as a body which is just talking about ethics or philosophy or history. Because number one thing, anything in Gurbani is true forever and ever, which is the first slok of Guru Granth Sahib. So if something is true forever and ever, we should not contain it in a box that this body is only about this. Yes, it has philosophical tendencies. Yes, it talks about ethical measures. Yes, there was historicity to this kind of a dialogue and debate. But primarily, this is about a dialogue to establish connection with the divine. So Sidh Gosti, although we have historical and poetic and philosophical impulses in it, must not be reduced to that. It needs to be looked at as a prophetic divine experience of Guru Nanak Sahib. Because for us, Bani is Turki Bani. For Sikhs, we take Bani as being a revelatory experience, something which Guru Nanak gets directly from Vahaguru. And what it does then is, if we are able to look at it as being more than a composition, more than a philosophical abstraction, then it will relate to different dimensions of psyche within us, and it will give us a way to the realization of perfect being, which is Vahaguru, Akal Purkh itself. So the idea is look at Sidh Gosti as Bani, as we study it, as we feel it, it is there to help us also talk to Vahaguru, help us see the culture of Naam within me and around me. This is to help me understand my behavior and my psyche, and this will be a way to create a harmony then. Okay, so there are a couple of more questions coming up. I'll ask Mantir Singh to come up and share your question. Go ahead, Mantir.
I think we're having a problem with Mantir Singh's mic. I have unmuted him. So Mantir Singh, if you try and speak, otherwise we'll have to get Harinder Singh to just ask the question.
I think I'm just going to read his question because we're having tough time speaking. So if you can. Okay, so Mantir's question is, did any of the Sidh convert, agree with Guru Nanak Sahib openly and join him? Oh, excellent question. Thanks for asking that. This is a very interesting question. What I have seen historically is that some of the Sidhs temporarily accepted Guru Nanak, that he is a winner. And this is my understanding. The reason I say temporarily is, this is the one major difference between, historically speaking, on how the larger Hindu culture and the larger Muslim culture looks at Guru Nanak. The larger Hindu culture, and here the representation of yogis is coming in, and the yogis accepted their defeat. Actually, we have one evidence of that, where one of the three possible debate spots was Gorakh Mata, the place of Gorakh, which after these debates was renamed to Nanak Mata, and the city still exists in UP Uttaranchal area near Nainital. So, did they concede to Guru Nanak Sahib? As people saw it, as spectators saw it, as some historical evidence suggests, yes, they did. But I would say they fully didn't do it because they rebound back and they keep questioning. If you look at the history of Sidh in relationship to Nath and yogis versus how they deal with Sikhs even today, the yogis are still very much countering and are working to bring Sikhs under their fold. So yes, in their ideology they accepted that Guru Nanak knows better. In reality, that much is still challenging us because we are surrounded by the yogic postures around us. And the extension of that question by Mandir is, a lot of people trying to understand Sikhi from a Judeo-Christian angle as about our view on heaven, hell and reincarnation. Did Guru Nanak Sahib specifically address those three aspects? Yeah, of course he has done it. You know, when the reference to the word Kateb comes, Kateb is the word for the books, people of the book, which refers to Judeo-Christian heritage, whose representative in India was Islam. And yes, he does address heaven and hell and reincarnation directly. Not as much in Sidh Gosti, because remember, yogis are not really after that. They actually don't even have belief in those things. But in their other banis where these things are covered, where Guru Nanak Sahib looks into this idea of dojak, which is versus bahisht or pisht, which is heaven or hell idea. Yes, they are directly addressed, and as you can pretty much guess, Guru Nanak's response to those is, it is all about here and now, these are not physical spaces for us. Another question is from Harpreet Singh, Harpreet had just written to me to answer this question. So these are the answers to those three things. Yes. Any other questions on Sidh Gosti or questions at large? We have 5 more minutes left. We are open to that. So while we have this break, there's a question coming. In the meantime, please don't log out. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to be starting the evaluation, and we do want all of you to fill that because we need your input on how this course went, how we can teach it better, and what other courses should we offer. The other question is coming on the definition of Maya from Parminder in Surrey. And she asked that, does being attached to your kid means you are in Maya? Excellent question. I like this approach to questions where they're more real and not just about abstract stuff. What's the definition of Maya? Well, as I don't like to get into definitions of things because I think Guru Nanak Sahib presents them as he sees them. So when he presented Maya, we understood that to be as a deception, where things which deceive you. So is attachment to your kids Maya? Well, it depends on your attitude towards kids. If you feel they should do everything the way you like, then there will be frustration. If you love them and you serve them with all your full capacities, then that's great. That's not Maya. Attachment is a word which is sometimes used for Maya. But Maya is when you start feeling that you are the final answer for everything. So if you serve your kids, you raise your kids, you nurture your kids from my angle that this is a gift and you are taking care of that gift for a time being until the gift and if a gift is taken away from you at any point in your life and you're ready to deal with it, then you're not in Maya. If you're operating that this everything is mine, and when something of mine is taken away from me, then we don't know how to deal with it, then we are operating in Maya. And that's a simplistic way to look at it. Does it mean we don't love our kid and we don't attach? Well, there's another part I want to bring to it. There's a line in Anand Sahib where Guru Das Sahib says, "Kurban kita tise vitton jin moh mitha laya." So remember, the yogis actually want to kill the desires. Guru Nanak's response was, I'm not working to kill them. I'm working to satisfy them with divine love. And this is one way to look at how we deal with our kids and how we deal with our spouses, how we deal with our community members. We are not trying to kill anything. We are trying to work on these attachments or vices or whatever you want to call them, ideas which end up overpowering us. We are trying to satisfy them, whereas yogi is trying to kill them. So don't work to kill these feelings. That will make us machine-like or yogi-like. We are supposed to work with our feelings and fill our feelings with not just the temporary feelings or not just the I-centered feelings, but the feelings of divine love, the feelings of Nam. Thank you for asking that, Fernanda. If there are no other questions, this will conclude our session. Thank you for participating. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned new vocabularies from the vocabulary list we said. I hope you keep studying this Bani over and over. If we can help in any capacity to further your study, please do email us at info@sikri.org. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. You can ask them, doesn't mean we have the answers, but we will try to give an approach to an answer perhaps. And please do keep in mind that Guru Nanak's mat is what is being covered in Sidh Gosti. And Guru Nanak is presenting how do you deal with other lifestyles, how do you deal with other schools of thought. And look at his style of dealing with other schools of thought. He's not saying they're wrong or they're bad or these people are whatever, as we might call them today. He's saying, well, this is your approach, this is what you're working towards, and he presents his approach, what he's working towards. And this is a great model for multicultural society where you not only are tolerating other views, but you're accepting of other views. And this is what Sikhs really need to learn from Guru Nanak's ideas and Sidh Gosti. We need to become truly multicultural people. While we practice our culture of Naam, we must allow others to practice their cultures. And within their cultures, if we find gaps, it's okay. Just like they might find gaps in our ways. The idea is how do you coexist while not diminishing your lifestyle. Right now the problem is a lot of us don't live our lifestyles. We are too afraid to present our lifestyle. And Guru Nanak Sahib is saying, live your way, present your way, don't preach your way, don't convert people to your way, but do present your lifestyle and your options. And if people want to adopt it, great. If they don't want to, that's great too. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the whole Sikri team for doing this for us. And thanks to all of you for joining us again. I'm going to start the evaluation session. I'm launching it. Please fill that out before you leave this session. Thanks again. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You should now see the webinar, the evaluation form launching in your browser window. If you're having problems having it launched or you can't see it being launched, then please do contact me via the chat panel. We will have this webinar open for the next 5 minutes and we'll then close it. And once we've closed it, then your evaluation forms will also be closed automatically. So please do complete your form within the next 5 minutes. So we'll be online for another 5 minutes or so, and then I'll give a minute's notice before closing. And if there's any questions in the meanwhile about filling the feedback form, please do let me know.